Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi everyone.
I see that the government's autumn statement is still in the news. Dennis, what's the latest?
Yes, last week's podcast contained a summary of the key measures in the autumn statement of interest to our sector and included some general responses. But here I look at the response both of the LGA and also commentary on the impact on our justice system. Responding to the autumn statement announced by the Chancellor, Councillor James Jamieson, Chairman of the Local Government Association, said it is good that the Chancellor has used the autumn statement to act on the LGA's call to save local services from spiralling inflation, demand and cost pressures. While the financial outlook for councils is better than we feared next year, councils recognise it will be residents and businesses who will be asked to pay more. We have been clear, he said, that council tax has never been the solution to meeting the long-term pressures facing services, particularly high-demand services like adult social care, child protection and homelessness prevention. It also raises different amounts of money in different parts of the country, unrelated to need, and adds to the financial burden facing households. We are pleased, he said, that government will provide extra funding for adult social care and accepted our demand for funding allocated towards reforms to still be available to address inflationary pressures for both councils and social care providers. Councillor Jamieson added, the revised social rent cap is higher than anticipated next year, but councils will still have to cope with the additional financial burden as a result of lost income. Councils support moves to keep social rents as low as possible, but this will have an impact on councils' ability to build the homes our communities desperately need, which is one of the best ways to boost growth and retrofit existing housing stock to help the government meet net zero goals. Councillor Jamieson concluded that financial turbulence is as damaging to local government as it is for our businesses and financial markets, and all councils and vital services such as social care, planning, waste and recycling collection and leisure centres continue to face an uncertain future. Councils want to work with central government to develop a long-term strategy to deliver critical local services and growth more effectively. Alongside certainty of funding and greater investment, this also means wider devolution where local leaders have greater freedom from central government to take decisions on how to provide vital services in their communities. And he is surely right on this. What the autumn statement did not provide is financial assurance for the future to enable financial decision-making to be planned over a period of time. Turning now to the justice system, Justice Bar Chair Mark Fenhall's KC said, while the Chancellor rightly recognises health and education as vital public services to be adequately funded, it is a mistake not to see justice in the same light. The cost of living crisis means that those most in need are now even more likely to require access to justice for help with housing, employment, debt and other essential legal issues. The justice sector was one of the hardest hit by austerity cuts a decade ago and was only just beginning to rebuild. This real terms cut to justice funding could put us back at square one, and that would be devastating for those most in need.
Now, the ICO are currently consulting on prioritising access to information complaints, which will run until the 19th of December this year. According to the ICO, limited funding, an increase in FOI cases brought to them, and an increased need to support stretched public authorities have created a perfect storm. They are therefore looking at ways to improve their FOI casework services to make information rights work more effectively. Amongst the proposals are new prioritisation criteria covering complaints made under both the Freedom of Information Act and Environmental Information Regulations. This includes the proposal to prioritise complaints where there is a clear public interest in the information that's been asked for. Public interest, of course, covers a wide range of values and principles relating to the public good, or what is in the best interests of society. The ICO acknowledges The present system means cases are taking a long time to complete, which ultimately hinders the delivery of effective transparency and open government. As part of this proposed approach, the ICO aimed to allocate priority cases within 4 weeks and complete them, they state, at pace, completing 90% of all cases within 6 months. Whilst the intent is no doubt laudable, the inevitable consequence, to my mind, is that long-standing cases will continue to endure very long waits for an outcome and may indeed suffer further delays whilst continuing to be pushed down the list. That said, the ICO are being proactive here and want to hear from those in public service to inform their proposals moving forward. LLG will coordinate responses where an appetite exists to do so. So let us know your views. Dennis, your next item brings us on to standards and ethics. Why is this in the news again?
Dominic Raab, that's why. How strange it is that he has requested an independent inquiry into his own behaviour when he says he hasn't done anything wrong. Let's look further into this. Perhaps it isn't so strange. At our governance conference the other week, an expert panel comprising LGA representatives and senior lawyers discussed the question, does how government and Parliament handle standards and ethical issues matter to the rest of the public sector? Does it matter to people generally? Yes, it does, they all agreed. There is definitely a trickle-down effect. The impression is created by bad behaviour that overall standards don't really matter. Enter the curious case of Deputy Prime Minister and Lord Chancellor Dominic Raab, a lawyer, past Foreign Secretary, and of course previously Lord Chancellor. New Prime Minister Rishi Sunak gave the clearest possible indication at the start of his premiership that he was committed to the achievement of the highest standards of conduct and behaviour in public life. He appointed Raab to his current government position and as his deputy, and they've been colleagues in government for some years. Indeed, Raab actively supported Sunak's campaign to become Prime Minister. Now, faced with allegations of bullying and intimidation by a number of civil servants across various government departments, Raab has asked the Prime Minister to instigate an independent inquiry that he, the Prime Minister, will finally adjudicate upon. But Mr. Sunak's initial response to these allegations when they emerged was to say that he did not recognise that such behaviour had taken place. This was not the Dominic Raab that he knew. Clearly, Mr. Sunak is predisposed to a favourable view of Mr. Raab's character. Is he the right person to judge his behaviour? So, given the connections that exist between Sunak and Raab, and the complete absence of genuine independence, of objectivity, and of impartiality that surrounds this inquiry before it even begins, is it really any wonder why aggrieved civil servants have been so reluctant previously to put forward any formal complaints? Regrettably, that trickle-down effect looks set to continue.
Well, they should just refer it to the ethics advisor. Oh, hang on, that's right, they haven't got one. Moving on, taken from the LGA Bulletin, community libraries are seeing an unprecedented rise in the number of people using their services, but soaring costs could force some to make drastic cuts and even shut next year, according to a charity. Libraries Connected says many of its members have expanded their services to help people struggling with higher prices, but that some libraries are now considering cutting staff, services, and the numbers of books they stock, with some even contemplating closure. The LGA said to save libraries, councils would require adequate funding in line with inflation and the demand for services. Now, I did a bit of research here, and in 2019, according to the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, there were 3,583 library branches in England, Scotland, and Wales. The sector was said to employ 15,300 employees, alongside a network of 51,000 volunteers. Staggering. National spending on the library service topped $1 billion in 2009 to 2010, but dropped to under $750 million by 2019-2020. and this has coincided with the closure of some 773 library branches. Now, Dennis, I see you have an item regarding licensing policies on gambling. Tell us more.
Yes, Westminster City Council have announced a new and innovative policy to protect vulnerable people from gambling harms. Here's the story. A new policy approach for gambling premises in Westminster will help reduce the risk to people who may be vulnerable to gambling-related harm, Westminster City Council has just announced. The Council has published its groundbreaking new policy for gambling in Westminster with a focus on protecting the most at risk, including children, from gambling harms. The new policy, which is the first of its kind in the UK, is part of the local authority's Fairer Westminster strategy and includes new opening hours and the identification of gambling vulnerability zones. Using a more data-driven approach, it will ensure gambling premises operate in a way that reduces their risk of harm and wider adverse impact on the community. The Council supports businesses contributing to Westminster's nighttime economy, but premises must not become a source of crime and disorder or be used to support crime. If gambling premises fail to demonstrate that they will be consistent in protecting children or other vulnerable adults from gambling harm, the Council could refuse to permit applications under the new policy. Westminster City Council now aim to strike a balance, appreciating that gambling premises play a key role in the city's local economy, whilst protecting the most vulnerable residents from harm. Councillor Aisha Less, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Communities and Public Protection, said, "Betting shops, casinos and other gambling premises play a role in Westminster's nighttime economy, and some venues attract thousands of tourists into the city every year." Councillor Less added that during a cost of living crisis, people's budgets are being stretched more and more, so using gambling as an alternative source of income is a real danger. I expect authorities will want to take a closer look at what Westminster is now doing and implement similar policies with an emphasis upon public protection.
Interesting case law to finish here, Dennis, in the case of Cowie and Oars and Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. The defendant fire service was sued by two groups of employees. The first, disabled workers who had shielded during COVID, and the second, women who had faced disruption to childcare arrangements, also during COVID. Now, this concerned a paid special leave policy, whereby such employees would continue to be paid, notwithstanding their inability to work. However, as preconditions for entitlement to be paid special leave under the policy, the employees in question first had to use up any accrued time off in lieu and their annual leave. Now, the Employment Tribunal found that the treatment in issue was the removal of the flexibility and choice of taking toil and annual leave at the time of the employee's choosing. This was held to be unfavourable treatment under Section 15 of the Equality Act. However, the Employment Appeal Tribunal overruled this, holding that the Employment Tribunal had fallen into error in allowing the complainant's complaint to define its assessment of treatment, and thus to artificially separate out the conditions of entitlement to a benefit from the benefit itself. The case also concerned indirect sex discrimination and injury to feelings, which were both dismissed, and it's well worth a read. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on that, the items discussed today, and many more besides by going to bulletin number 43, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Thank you for listening. Have a good week.